Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Live It Up. This is the show where we explore and discuss how to take your life to that next level and beyond. We cover health, wealth, relationships, and how to create a life you absolutely love. I'm your host and coach, Fletcher. Amy will be joining us as we talk about a health issue that affects just shy of 800,000 Americans each year. We're going to be talking about strokes. What is a stroke, and are you at risk for it, and what can you do to prevent them? Remember, health is the first wealth, so stick around. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that if you have questions that you would like us to answer on or off the air, you can email them directly to me at fletcher@fletcherellingson.com. If you are feeling stuck in an area of your life, whether it's financially or in your health or in your relationships, get into action. Reach out to us because you don't need to suffer. There are answers and there are solutions and ways to get unstuck and move forward powerfully. So let's get to today's question. It says, "Hello, Fletcher. I am 2 years into my real estate career and I am just scraping by. I thought I'd be making enough by now to support my family, but instead I'm having to work a second job to make ends meet. I see others around me making the money that I thought I would be making, but it hasn't happened yet. 2 years should be enough to get my business launched, but it hasn't been the case. Thinking about throwing in the towel unless things change dramatically in the next 6 months. Any advice? Thanks, signed R.E. Hey, R.E. First of all, well done on reaching out for advice. Asking for help is a sign of strength, which means you are strong. It's not always easy to reach out. It can be scary, but the more you do it, the better you become at it and the easier it becomes. You also realize that there are people out there who are ready and eager to help the more you get into action and ask for help. So let me break this down. You're 2 years into your new business as a real estate agent, and I get that you see other agents closing more deals than you and making more money, and you feel like this should be happening for you too. And since it's not, you're thinking about giving it another 6 months and reevaluating your career. So I have several things to say about this. Number one, we frequently overestimate what we can do in 1 to 2 years, and we underestimate what we can do in 5 years. So you're in business for yourself, and you're creating your own economy. This takes time. And I know it may not be what you want to hear, but it takes time to build a business. That first 24 months is going to be a lot of trial and error, then some learning, then some adjusting, then more trial and error and more adjusting until you begin to see patterns that produce the results you want. It's very common for entrepreneurs to feel like they should be further along than they are. And so I invite you to consider something radical. I want you to consider that you are exactly where you need to be in your journey. Your desire to be further along is completely appropriate. It means you can see where you want to be. But let me share something that I recently learned about bamboo. Bamboo is actually a giant grass, and it achieves new heights every year by sending up new and larger shoots each spring. Usually starting between April and June, the new shoots emerge from the ground and reach their full height in 2 to 3 months. For example, a young bamboo that is about 8 feet tall with 4 canes may produce 3 additional new shoots in the spring that grow to 10 feet within just 2 months' time. Next spring, those 7 canes will produce about 5 to 10 new shoots that could reach 15 feet. Fast forward 4 years, that same plant is now 60 canes strong and up to 30 feet tall. Because the canes are connected by a rhizome, it is functioning as a single plant. And now it has the energy needed to produce larger and more numerous new shoots each spring that grow from the ground up to 35 feet in 2 months. It's incredible. Now, why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because it's a lot like business. Each year you're in business, and I'm making the assumption that you're in action and working on the business, it's going to grow. And at some point, it's going to take off. You're going to see exponential growth. If you're doing the work, it's going to happen. You mentioned that others are already seeing growth and success, and there may be a temptation to compare yourself, but just know that usually when we compare ourselves to others, it doesn't feel very good. We frequently don't measure up to the competition, and that leaves us feeling inadequate and causes self-doubt. So here's what I suggest. When you see others who have the outcomes that you want, be inspired. Cheer them on, because they've proven that what you want is possible. They're demonstrating that what you're seeking is attainable. So be grateful that they're doing it, and then get curious. What are they doing that's working? Because if it works for them, it will likely work for you. Success is always a formula, and it's a repeatable formula. So take them out for coffee, pick their brain, read their blog, read what they read. Go to the seminars they attend, get around people who have the results you want. That's the fastest way to expedite your own success, and I can tell you that this has been the case in my own life. Finally, I want to ask you some questions, and I want you to be honest with yourself. How many hours a day are you actually working on your business? How many hours a day or week are you actually, and where do your fears lie around your business? Because if you can break through them and create new habits, you're going to get new results. And last but not least, I'm inviting you to my seminar, which is called NCW Business Breakthroughs, which is going to be here in Wenatchee on January 24th. Join us, and you'll learn the fastest way to build your business to a six-figure income. I'll show you how I did it, how you can do it too. Go to FletcherEllingson.com, click on seminars, and then click on NCW Business Breakthroughs and sign up. It's going to be a full day of incredibly helpful content, inspiration, and of course, breakthroughs. Okay, Ari, stay in action. You can do this. All right, guys, stick around. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to visit with Amy. Hey everybody, welcome back to Live It Up. We are here with Amy.
Hello.
Hello. All right, what are we talking about today? What's the topic?
We're going to talk about stroke.
Okay. Well, tell us first of all, yes, it is a big deal. Yes. Tell us first of all, where does that word come from?
Well, I didn't really think about that question until I brought up this topic, and you're like, where does that word come from? And I didn't really know. So I looked it up, and back in the day, stroke was always called apoplexy, because people were kind of like, had this fit maybe, and maybe were unconscious or had something that just happened with their body. But then the lay people, meaning non-medical people, they started using the word stroke, because it was as if someone was struck down by a condition just suddenly, because that's what happens. It's just very sudden. So that's where the term stroke comes from, where people started using it, again, like someone, as if, because someone seemed to have been struck by something.
Got it. All right.
There you go.
They were stroke. They were struck, or they were stroke. So how common is stroke in the U.S.?
It's really common. It's the number 5 leading cause of death and disability in the U.S. It kills about 140,000 people a year. That's about 1 out of every 20 people that die in our country are caused by stroke. And the stats are that someone is having a stroke every 40 seconds.
Yikes.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
So it's really common. About 800,000 people a year have a stroke.
That's a lot, and this is one of those things that we hear about it, frequently.
Yeah.
Like we know people who've had them, or we hear about people having them.
Yeah, and in my elderly population, they're quite afraid of strokes because because you can be left. It can be very devastating. Right. A lot of times my patients, this may sound kind of odd to most people not in the medical profession, but I have patients actually tell me they're not necessarily afraid, people maybe in their 80s, right, that they feel like they've lived a good life and they're ready to go. Like, I really wouldn't mind, they tell me they really wouldn't mind having a stroke that kills them, but they're very afraid of a stroke that disables them.
Yeah. Because
they lose their independence, their ability to communicate, and it's really scary.
That's understandable.
For people.
So tell us, what actually happens when someone has a stroke?
So a stroke occurs when a blood vessel in the brain so the blood vessel is carrying blood to the brain tissue, which is carrying oxygen. So when that blood vessel either bursts or is blocked, and the blood and therefore oxygen and nutrients can't get to the tissue, a stroke occurs when those brain cells die because of a blockage or a burst artery.
Got it. Okay.
And I'll go on with that. So that there's a couple ways, so to clarify that more. So the first one with the blockage, which is the most common type of stroke, is called an ischemic stroke. Ischemic. And so ischemia means, that's the term, we'll use it in the heart, we'll use it in other areas of the body. Ischemia is just a general term when there is cell death caused by lack of oxygen, which is usually caused by lack of blood supply, because the blood is what carries the oxygen. So with the ischemic stroke, then there's usually a blockage in that blood vessel, and then downstream from that blockage, you're going to have ischemia and then cell death. The blockage usually, or most commonly happens, is caused by atherosclerosis, which we've talked about before, when there's a plaque that has developed in the artery and causes narrowing, and then there can be something where that plaque gets a little bit disrupted, and then an acute clot forms on it, and then all of a sudden that blood vessel gets blocked, and then the tissue downstream from that isn't getting the oxygen it needs. There's another less common cause of an ischemic stroke, which is called an embolic type of stroke, and that's where there's a little piece of a clot that breaks off, usually from your heart, or either from the valve or from the chambers, and it goes up, it travels up the artery to the brain and one of the arteries there, and it just acutely closes off the blood supply and causes ischemia, again, downstream. People with atrial fibrillation are more at risk of having that because the blood can pool in the heart, and then a little clot can form and a little piece can come off. And just the other type of stroke is called a hemorrhagic stroke, and this is about 13% of cases, so much less common. Hemorrhagic stroke, which means there's hemorrhage, which means there's bleeding. So when there's a weakened blood vessel that ruptures and bleeds, the blood that is in that area accumulates and compresses on the surrounding tissue and causes cell death. Because your brain is a fixed volume thing. You have this hard case around it. So it can't just swell indefinitely. It doesn't have room for blood in there. So then it can cause pressure on that tissue. So the most common cause of the hemorrhagic type stroke is if someone were to have an aneurysm, which most people have heard of that word. And again, it's a generic term that we use for any artery in the body, but in this case we're talking about an artery in the brain, where the wall of the artery is weakened and it starts to balloon out. So most people aren't born with, usually people aren't born with aneurysms. They occur as people get older, usually from certain medical conditions, and as it balloons out, the wall can weaken and can cause bleeding.
Gotcha. And that's an aneurysm.
Yeah, that's an aneurysm, bleeding from an aneurysm. I know that was a lot of information.
That was a lot of information. We better take a commercial break.
We should take a commercial break. Take a break. Yeah.
All right. We'll be back. Stay with us. Hey everybody, welcome back to Live It Up. We're here with Amy and we're talking about strokes and what they are, how to prevent them, symptoms. We covered a lot in that first segment. But let's now talk about what are the symptoms of it. What should we be?
Yeah, I feel like we have a lot more to talk about. So yeah, I can't stress enough that if someone you know or yourself ever has symptoms of stroke, that you really need to call 911 right away. And the medical world is very trained to act on this quickly. The sooner you get treated, the less likely you are to have long-term effects from the stroke. So the type of stroke can also determine what symptoms you have. So let's talk about ischemic stroke. And it also depends on what area of the brain is affected. Well, it of course does. So depending on where in the brain the stroke is will determine the symptoms you have. So sudden weakness or numbness of your face, arm, or leg, usually on one side of your body. Confusion, problems speaking, that's a really common one where you know what you want to say but you can't say it, or you might have problems understanding what people are saying that happens suddenly. Unexplained dizziness, loss of balance or coordination, all of a sudden trouble walking or trouble doing something. Abrupt loss of vision, usually in one eye, loss of coordination, sensation, dimness in, already said that, double vision, and then or a sudden or severe headache, which is usually going to go along with hemorrhagic stroke. So usually hemorrhagic stroke will all of a sudden you'll have a sudden or severe headache, and it will be the worst headache of your life, people say. And it can last for hours to days. If it happens, hopefully it won't last for days, because hopefully you will have gone into the doctor. And then if it does proceed to ischemia, like we talked about, then you would have the same kind of symptoms of stroke, where you'd have weakness, trouble speaking or understanding, vision problems, or even seizures can also be a sign of stroke.
Got it. Yeah, that is a lot.
That's a lot.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
So I read about the fast mnemonic.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, the fast mnemonic was created so people would have something to memorize and know that was really quick and easy, and also for the medical profession to use it quickly. So the fast exam, the F stands for face drooping. So if you think someone's having a stroke, in your family or someone you're with, you can look for this. Face drooping is F, A is arm weakness, S is speech slurred, so slurred speech, hard to say. And then T means time to call 911. So when you get to the emergency room, they also do a fast exam, but just the FAS, where they look at your face, they look for arm weakness, and they have you speak. And then they'll help determine whether whether they think you're having a stroke or not.
Okay. And then I also have heard about something called TIA or
Yeah.
TIA.
No, it's TIA.
Okay.
TIA means aunt in Spanish.
Right. I was like
Right.
confused, like,
It's TIA, so it's called a transient ischemic attack, or people also call it a mini stroke. People have heard of that. And it's caused by a temporary clot or temporary loss of blood supply to an area. So, meaning that the brain tissue loses blood supply, but just for a little bit of time, and it's not permanent. So it can last just even a couple of minutes. The body kind of fights back by usually using its own the chemicals we have in our body to break up clots, and so it's not, the blockage isn't long enough to cause permanent damage. And again, depending on where that happens in the brain is going to determine what symptoms you would have.
And so that's less serious then, obviously.
Well, it's not. It is less serious in the fact that it doesn't cause permanent. It's not causing permanent damage right then. So of course you're lucky. So say people will actually have slurred speech, but say it lasts like less than 15 minutes, then that's a TIA. But the thing is, you really do want to take it very seriously because it's a major warning sign, because it means that someone is at risk of having a full-blown stroke ahead, or in the future. So it could actually be called like a warning stroke. So because a third of people that have a TIA are going to go on to have a stroke within that first year. So if you have a TIA or you think someone is having a TIA, again, you want to call 911 because you want to get the appropriate workup for that and learn what you can do to prevent stroke.
Got it. So we talked about the risks and symptoms.
Yeah.
What does somebody do once they're at the hospital? I mean, how's it then diagnosed?
Yeah, so if someone gets to the emergency room, usually a stroke code is called already on your way, and the ambulance lets them know that they think they have a possible stroke, because you really want to have this very timely. So they do a fast exam where they again have you speak, look at your face, have you raise your arms up or try to squeeze their hands, and then the person is usually taken straight to the CAT scan machine. So a CT scan. If it's very early, it may look normal, but what the CT scan helps us do is to know whether there's any bleeding in there. So because the two types of stroke are treated very differently. And so that's what you do. You go ahead and get a CT scan, and then the doctor is able to make their decision.
Okay. So once they've determined that it is a stroke, what are the treatments that are available?
So the reason this now will explain to people what the urgency is for getting this diagnosed quickly. So for ischemic stroke, and we know there's no bleeding, and there's no, and we know that someone's having a stroke, then they're given a medication. Ideally, someone's given a medication called TPA. And what this medication does is it kind of looks like a clot busting drug, so it dissolves the clot. But it can only be given if you've had the stroke symptoms for 3 to 4.5 hours. So it actually has to be infused by then, or start the infusion by then. So it's very important. So that by the time you notice symptoms, you call 911, you get to the ER, the doctor's seeing you, the CT scan's back and read. You want all of that to happen within just a couple of hours. So then you can determine if someone is eligible to have the TPA or not. And then it's given IV, and it will help reduce the risk of having permanent damage. Under certain circumstances, if there is a clot, then they actually want to do a mechanical removal of the clot. And it's pretty cool, these types of procedures. You can actually go up through the groin, and they actually take a little cage, like a basket, and they retrieve the clot. Or they actually sometimes will even open up the artery and remove the clot, although I can't say I've ever seen that be done.
So where would the clot be?
In the brain. They actually go all the way up.
Whoa.
I know. It's really cool. Radiology does that. And then if you have a hemorrhagic stroke, where that's the type that bleeds, so usually from an aneurysm, the goal of treatment in that case is to stop the bleeding, right? So usually that's going to be done mechanically. And again, this is very cool. So they thread up a catheter either through your arm or your leg in the artery, go all the way up to the brain, and they're using a little camera And they can find the aneurysm, they put in a little coil that literally like prevents further bleeding in that little aneurysm. Sometimes, like in what they used to do before they were able to do coiling, is they would actually have to open up your brain and they put a little clip at the base of the aneurysm. And so sometimes that would still be done, but they mostly are doing the endovascular procedure, which is up through the artery.
That is amazing.
I know, it's really, really cool.
Dang. Let's talk about risks. Like, how does somebody know if they are at risk for a stroke? Because nobody wants to get this.
No, no one wants to get this. So there are several medical conditions that increase your risk of stroke, and you should definitely work with your doctor to help control any of these issues or reverse them. So obviously, if you had a TIA, you already know you're at risk of having a stroke. So you really want to get on your risk factors and get them controlled. High blood pressure is one of the leading causes of stroke. It's very important, and the higher your blood pressure is above normal, the risk of stroke goes up with the level of your blood pressure. So you really want to control your blood pressure. Diabetes is a very common risk of stroke because it causes blood vessel damage. So you want to have your A1C be controlled. Heart disease, so atrial fibrillation, I talked about. If you're not on a blood thinner, you're going to have an increased risk of stroke. So it's important to manage that. That's a main one. If you have a valve issue, that can also make increased risk. And then we always talk about kind of controllable lifestyle risk factors, right? So smoking is a huge risk for stroke and heart disease.
So that's if you're a smoker and listening to this, one of the best ways to reduce
you need to
your
quit
risk
smoking,
is quit
right?
smoking.
If you don't want to have a stroke, and again, you may be fine with dying, but you don't want to be disabled from a stroke. So you want to quit smoking now. Even if you smoked for years, there's still benefit in quitting now. Having high cholesterol can increase the risk of stroke. Being sedentary can increase your risk of heart disease, which can increase your risk of stroke. Excessive alcohol intake. Illegal drug use is more specifically cocaine increases your risk of stroke as well because it constricts the arteries and elevates blood pressure. I was going to say, some of the things you can't control would be people over age 60 are more likely to have a stroke. Men are more likely to have it at a young age, and then African American and Hispanic Americans are more likely to have a stroke as well probably mostly because of high blood pressure and diabetes.
And you mentioned to me another time something about diet as well.
Yeah, so I mean, like we've talked about before, right? So like diet high in vegetables, you want to have a low salt diet, and limiting fast food. I was going to tell you about just we can end on these tips for prevention, which goes with diet. So one is quitting smoking is number one. Monitoring your blood pressure, making sure that your doctor is satisfied with your numbers. Control your cholesterol. Keep your blood sugar down. Either reverse your diabetes or at least control your diabetes. Get active and get moving because that's good for your arteries and your heart. And then eating better. So little to zero fast food because it's very high in fat and salt. So really focusing on a whole food diet with lots of vegetables. And if your doctor has advised you to lose weight because of your weight level, then lose weight. So those are ways to try to prevent a stroke.
All right. Thank you very much for all that information.
There's a lot, I know.
That's good. Good stuff, though. We need to know that. All right, guys. That's all we have for you today. It's time to get out there, be a source of kindness, be a source of contribution. You have something this world needs, and we believe in you.